This seems to be the time of year that we have various special days, holidays, whatever you want to call them. And if I'm not mistaken, we had one this week. Does anyone remember what that was?
Veterans Day.
Veterans Day. And I'm not sure I've ever spoken a Veterans Day message, but that's what I'm going to try to do today. And so I have some warriors that I would like to pay tribute to this morning. But before I get too far into this, perhaps you'd like to share who were or are your heroes. Okay.
Dad was always my hero growing up.
Okay. Your dad. Anyone else want to share? There. Her grandma. You know, heroes don't have to be some famous, written up in the newspapers, splashed over the TVs, or a comic book made out of them. When I was growing up, I didn't really feel like I had any heroes. There were definitely people that I admired very much, but in the hero worshiping sort of way, that just wasn't the way my family did things. We might think very highly of someone, but at the same time we realized that, well, they probably put their pants on one leg at a time. Maybe they could do it two at once, but most people couldn't. And most people, no matter how wonderful they seemed, usually had something they were struggling with. That didn't make them bad people. It simply meant that they were people just like people are people. But some of the people that I found myself looking up to were admittedly mostly people that I read about. For instance, I was very prolific in my reading of a series called The Childhood of Famous Americans. Some of you may have come across that. But I read about Luther Burbank, George Washington Carver, John Paul Jones, Admiral Farragut, Lewis and Clark, Alexander Graham Bell, Samuel Morse, Albert Einstein, Kit Carson, Jim Bowie, Alvin York, Jim Bridger, Davy Crockett, Sam Houston, Teddy Roosevelt, Molly Pitcher, Florence Nightingale, and Betsy Ross. And I found these people to be very interesting and fascinating. And in the stories that were told, their lives looked like something that you could learn a thing or two from. Well, I also had other books that I read. You may remember the JMV reading program. I devoured those books too. And I learned about Luther and Tyndale and Wycliffe, Livingston, Eric B. Hare, Uriah Smith, Roger Williams, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, Sam Campbell, Joseph Bates. These people became real to me through what I was reading. They weren't just a name on a list. And of course, from littlest child, there were the Bible heroes. Samuel, Moses, Daniel, David, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Nehemiah, Elijah, Esther, Elisha, Jeremiah, Deborah, Mrs. Noah, Caleb, Joshua, There was just something special about these people. Something to be admired, something to look up to, something to, dare I say, fashion your life after. After all, even Paul said that he wanted his followers to follow him as he followed Christ. And a couple that you might find unusual, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. Now remember, I was pretty young and I didn't grow real tall real fast. But as a teenager, I kept seeing my age creeping closer and closer to that magic number 18 when you got drafted and you went and died in Vietnam. At least that's the way I saw it. And Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger were my heroes because they kept the Paris peace talks going, trying to end that war that I fully expected to end me. In one way or another, most of these I've mentioned were warriors of one kind or another. And one of the things that we respect about warriors are that they are willing to take risks that may be harder for us to take. I wonder if you remember some of the bits of the story about Caleb. Now you remember that Caleb and Joshua were the only two of the 12 that got sent out that had a good report when they came back from spying out the land. They were the only two that said, hey, let's go, we can take it. Everyone else was, oh, no. Yeah, it's a good land. I mean, you can see these huge grapes we brought back, but there's giants in them there hills. Caleb and Joshua said, you know, the Lord's for us. We can do this. Well, it took a long time. But Caleb finally ended up back in the promised land where he'd gone to spy it out. In Joshua chapter 14, looking at verses 6 to 13, and we're also going to look at chapter 15, verses 13 and 14. They had come into the land. They had subdued much of it. It says, then the children of Judah came unto Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said unto him, thou knowest the thing that the Lord said unto Moses, the man of God, concerning me and thee in Kadesh Barnea. 40 years old I was when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to espy out the land. And I brought him word again that it was as it was in mine heart. Nevertheless, my brethren that went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses sware on that day, saying, surely the land whereon thy feet have trodden shall be thine inheritance, and thy children's forever, because thou hast wholly followed the Lord my God. And now, behold, the Lord hath kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, even since the Lord spake this word unto Moses, while the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now, lo, I am this day 85 years old. Remember your old math using scores? He was 85 years old. You know, we think if someone makes it to 85 today, they're doing pretty good. And if they can get around on their own, we think they're doing real good. So you might expect him to say, I'm 85 years old now, and I've been waiting and waiting and waiting Y'all go and conquer that for me so I can finally have a place to sit down and rest. But that's not what he says. Verse 11, as yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now, for war, both to go out and to come in. Now therefore give me this mountain, whereof the Lord spake in that day, for thou heardest in that day how the Anakims were there. You know who the Anakim were? They were the giants. The ones that all the other men were saying, but there are giants in them there hills. We can't do it. Caleb is asking for the worst, hardest to take territory. For thou heardest in that day how the Anakims were there, and that the cities were great and fenced. If so be the Lord will be with me, then I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. And Joshua blessed him, and gave unto Caleb the son of Jephunneh Hebron for an inheritance. And we skip down to Joshua 15, verses 13 and 14. It says, and unto Caleb the son of Jephunneh he gave a part among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua, even the city of Arba, the father of Anak, which city is Hebron. And Caleb drove thence the three sons of Anak, Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak. Caleb was a warrior. Caleb, for years and years and years, had fought the battles of the children of Israel. And here he is, 85 years old, saying, okay, I want my portion now. You don't have to do anything, just give it to me. I will conquer it in the name of the Lord. Caleb was the type of soldier who would receive high awards in today's military. But you know, we're all involved in a war, and there's no escaping it. As Paul read in our scripture from Revelation 12, verses 7 and 8 and 17, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. You see, this goes back before the start of the human family on earth. But we see in verse 17 how we got involved. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. If you're on Jesus' side, the dragon wants to destroy you. It's that simple. And you know, it's high time we get out of our R&R mentality and get and stay combat ready. There was a fellow by the name of Ezra. You may have read some of his story in the book that is named for him, one of those nice Old Testament books. And he had received orders from what you might basically call, king of the earth, the big one anyway, to go and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And he did as he was told. But there was something interesting that happened. In Ezra chapter 8, and I'm sorry you won't find that in your handout this morning because I forgot to put it in there. Ezra 8, verse 21, then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, and now that we might afflict ourselves before our God to seek of him a right way for us and for our little ones and for all our substance. Verse 22, for I was ashamed to require of the king a band of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy in the way, because we had spoken unto the king, saying, the hand of our God is upon all them for good that seek him, but his power and his wrath is against all them that forsake him. So we fasted and besought our God for this, and he was entreated of us. Now, from a human standpoint, that sounds kind of foolish. Ezra has a fairly good-sized band with him, but most of them are carrying gold and other precious things that through all these, well, roads, if you will, through the mountains, through the desolate places, past inhabited areas, everyone wanted what they had and would be very happy to take it from them. By force, if necessary, or maybe preferably by force. You got to have some fun, you know. But Ezra says, no, we're not going to ask the king to send a guard with us. We're going to ask the Lord to take care of us, just like we told the king he would do. And they went on, and they reached their destination safely and began their work. Like I said, might seem kind of foolish these days. I'm going to go and I'm going to take a caravan of food and supplies and medicines, and I'm first going to go through Afghanistan, let some of it off there. Then I'm going over to Iran, down into Iraq. I'm sure they won't mind me crossing the border there. You know, you're looking at me like I'm insane. That's probably the way some people thought about Ezra, too. Is, wait a second, we've got all this stuff that these people would love to take from us. Why aren't we getting some help from the king? But Ezra knew a greater king. In about 1967 or 68, the book was published in 67, but I'm not sure exactly which year I read it. I read a book about a fellow named Desmond Doss. You might have heard of him. It was called The Unlikeliest Hero, the story of Desmond T. Doss, conscientious objector who won his nation's highest military honor. It's written by Boot Herndon. And it was about a fellow named Desmond Thomas Doss, who was born on February 7, 1919, and joined the U.S. Army, worked his way up to corporal before he was done. He was a combat medic with an infantry company in World War II. He was twice awarded the Bronze Star for actions in Guam and the Philippines. He further distinguished himself in the Battle of Okinawa by saving 75 men All the exact number isn't known. The story, as I understand it, is he himself said there were probably about 50. His commanding officer said, no, there were 100. And there is evidence for that, in that there were 155 soldiers involved in the action, 55 of which managed to get back on their own. So there's 100 that didn't make it back on their own. And there's fairly good evidence that at that time PFC Doss rescued those 75 to 100 men. They agreed between themselves that they'd put it down as 75 and let it go at that. Split the difference. Because of his actions, he became the only conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor for his actions during World War II. His life has been the subject of books, the documentary, The Conscientious Objector, and the film that came out in 2016 called Hacksaw Ridge. Now, I have not seen Hacksaw Ridge. The research I have done on it says they didn't manage to get everything straight. Well, I probably prefer to read books than to watch popular movies. But the story, nevertheless, is an amazing story. Desmond Doss was born in Lynchburg, Virginia, to William Thomas Doss, who was a carpenter, and Bertha Edward Doss, who was a homemaker and shoe factory worker. His mother raised him as a devout Seventh-day Adventist and instilled Sabbath-keeping, nonviolence, and a vegetarian lifestyle in his upbringing. He grew up in the Fairview Heights area of Lynchburg, Virginia, alongside his older sister Audrey and his younger brother Harold. He attended the Park Avenue Seventh-day Adventist Church School until the 8th grade, and subsequently found a job at the Lynchburg Lumber Company to support his family during the Great Depression. Before the outbreak of World War II, Doss was employed as a joiner at a shipyard in Newport News, Virginia. Despite being offered a deferment because of his work in the shipyard, he entered military service at Camp Lee, Virginia on April 1, 1942. He was sent to Fort Jackson in South Carolina for training with the reactivated 77th Infantry Division. Doss refused to kill an enemy soldier or carry a weapon into combat because of his personal beliefs as a Seventh-day Adventist. He consequently became a medic assigned to the 2nd Platoon, Company B, 1st Battalion, 307th Infantry, 77th Infantry Division. And let me tell you, there is a whole lot glossed over in that one paragraph. The troubles that he had from his commanding officers, from his fellow troops, it was not pretty. And I dare say most people would have given up. While serving with his platoon in 1944 on Guam in the Philippines, he was awarded 2 Bronze Stars with a V device for exceptional valor in aiding wounded soldiers under fire. During the Battle of Okinawa, he saved the lives of 50 to 100 wounded infantrymen atop the area known by the 96th Division as the Maida Escarpment or Hacksaw Ridge. Doss was wounded 4 times in Okinawa and was evacuated on May 21, 1945. Doss suffered a left arm fracture from a sniper's bullet and at one point had 17 pieces of shrapnel embedded in his body. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Hawaii. Things did not end just because he was evacuated. After the war, initially Doss planned to continue his career in carpentry, but extensive damage to his left arm made him unable to do so. In 1946, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, which he had contracted in the Philippines. He underwent treatment for 5.5 years, which cost him a lung and 5 ribs, before being discharged from the hospital in August 1951 with 90% disability. He continued to receive treatment from the military, but after an overdose of antibiotics given to him in 1976, it rendered him completely deaf. He was given 100% disability. He was able to regain his hearing after receiving a cochlear implant in 1988. Despite the severity of his injuries, Doss managed to raise a family on a small farm in Rising Fawn, Georgia. After being hospitalized for difficulty breathing, Doss died on March 23, 2006, at his home in Piedmont, Alabama. He was buried April 3, 2006 in the National Cemetery in Chattanooga, Tennessee. As I said, the only conscientious objector to be awarded the Medal of Honor. His citation for the Medal of Honor reads, "The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress March 3, 1863, has awarded in the name of the Congress the Medal of Honor to Private First Class Desmond T. Doss, United States Army, for services as set forth in the following citation. Private First Class Desmond T. Doss, United States Army, Medical Detachment, 307th Infantry, 77th Infantry Division, near Urasomura, Okinawa, Ryukyu Islands, 29 April to 21 May 1945. He was a company aid man when the 1st Battalion assaulted a jagged escarpment 400 feet high. As our troops gained the summit, and let me parenthetically insert here, they gained the summit by climbing up cargo nets that Desmond Doss helped to place. And there is a picture of him standing at the top of the escarpment after they had gotten the cargo nets to the top. As our troops gained the summit, a heavy concentration of artillery, mortar, and machine gun fire crashed into them, inflicting approximately 75 casualties and driving the others back. Private First Class Doss refused to seek cover and remained in the fire-swept area with the many stricken, carrying them one by one to the edge of the escarpment, and there lowering them on a rope-supported ladder down the face of a cliff to friendly hands. On 2nd of May, he exposed himself to heavy rifle and mortar fire in rescuing a wounded man 200 yards forward of the lines on the same escarpment. And 2 days later, he treated 4 men who had been cut down while assaulting a strongly defended cave, advancing through a shower of grenades to within 8 yards. If you haven't done the math, that's only 24 feet. I'm not sure if that's as far as the back doors here. Just amazes me. Within 8 yards. Of enemy forces in the cave's mouth, where he dressed his comrades' wounds and made 4 separate trips under fire to evacuate them to safety. On the 5th of May, he unhesitatingly braved enemy shelling and small arms fire to assist an artillery officer. He applied bandages, moved his patient to a spot that offered protection from small arms fire, and while artillery and mortar shells fell close by, painstakingly administered plasma. Later that day, when an American was severely wounded by fire from a cave, Private First Class Doss crawled to him where he had fallen 25 feet from the enemy position, rendered aid, and carried him 100 yards to safety while continually exposed to enemy fire. On the 21st of May, in a night attack on the high ground near Shuri, he remained in exposed territory while the rest of his company took cover, fearlessly risking the chance that he would be mistaken for an infiltrating Japanese and giving aid to the injured until he was himself seriously wounded in the legs by the explosion of a grenade. Rather than call another aid man from cover, he cared for his own injuries and waited 5 hours before litter bearers reached him and started carrying him to cover. Although it's not mentioned in this citation, during that 5 hours, the pain got so bad that he had to administer some morphine to himself. He wasn't just laying there waiting for litter bearers. He was in agony at the time as well. But it only gets better. Waited 5 hours before litter bearers reached him and started carrying him to cover. The trio was caught in an enemy tank attack, and Private First Class Doss, seeing a more critically wounded man nearby, crawled off the litter and directed the bearers to give their first attention to the other man. Awaiting the litter bearer's return, he was again struck, this time suffering a compound fracture of one arm. With magnificent fortitude, he bound a rifle stock to his shattered arm as a splint, and then crawled 300 yards over rough terrain to an aid station. Through his outstanding bravery and unflinching determination in the face of desperately dangerous conditions, Private First Class Doss saved the lives of many soldiers. His name became a symbol throughout the 77th Infantry Division for outstanding gallantry far above and beyond the call of duty. Signed, Harry S. Truman, October 12, 1945, the White House. In reading other Medal of Honor citations, I often found that the recipients had shielded their comrades with their own bodies while administering aid. Doss had been offered a deferment, but he chose to serve. And I am reminded of my true hero, Jesus Christ, who didn't have to come to rescue me, but chose to willingly, who selflessly took the wounds that were meant for me, who continues to shield me from the assaults of the enemy and will one day soon take me home when the battle is over. He's a hero I can follow anywhere. I want to be like him. As Paul put it in Philippians 2, verses 1 to 11, if there be therefore any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any bowels and mercies, fulfill ye my joy, that ye be like indeed, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. Let this mind be in you, which also was in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men, and being found in the fashion of a man, he humbled himself, and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God hath so highly exalted him, and given him a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. You know, Jesus didn't come to bring condemnation and death. He had a different way of fighting. John chapter 3, verses 16 to 19. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. Let's get off our duffs, put on the mind of Christ, and follow him to victory. It's time to go home. Our closing song is number 311, I Would Be Like Jesus.